Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alan Zarenberg, president of the California Chamber of Commerce, and thanks for joining us today for a discussion about California and United Kingdom after Brexit prospects for partnership. And today we're really honored to have back, and I say back because he's been with us before, Dr. Matt Beach, who's the senior fellow at the Institute of European Studies at UC Berkeley and director of the Center for British Politics at the University of Hull. And he's a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and Royal Society of the Arts, and is internationally renowned expert on the UK and Brexit, and has been on the Washington Post, Financial Times, BBC Radio, CNBC, just to mention a few. So we're really fortunate to have Dr. Matt Beach with us today, and I'm going to call him Matt as we go through it. And just to make sure that he added some personal experience, he went back to the UK just to do this. So he's not in Berkeley, but he's actually in the UK. So Dr. Beach, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I think it's great and very timely. And maybe as you go through the timeline, a little bit of what happened and where we are, you could, I'll kick this off with one of the questions that people have submitted. And what were the goals of the proponents of Brexit, of the exit from the European Union? And which of those have been satisfied and which have not? And that's a way to say, not to pick winners and losers, but to understand whether or not the people who really were anxious to do this really achieved what they were after. And we can talk about the consequences for everybody else. So Dr. Beach, thank you so much for being here.
Alan, it's wonderful to be with you again. I absolutely had a wonderful time at the Cal Chamber in April 2019. You treated me really well. Great to partner with Cal Chamber, and great to speak to business leaders and lots of interested citizens. So let's reflect on Brexit. So those Brexiteers, as they're commonly called, those folk who wanted to leave the European Union, they had a couple of different reasons, but primarily there were two reasons. The first was one to regain sovereignty, so that the United Kingdom Parliament, which is the House of Commons and the House of Lords, so Parliament would be the body and the sole body which would make law for British citizens, that it would be able to determine its own borders and levels of immigration, determine its own money. And because obviously you have to be a dues-paying member, as the Americans say, to pay into the European Union. And the United Kingdom, it's worth saying, was always a net contributor. So we always paid more in than we got out every single year of membership. And of course, and ultimately it was about that, not being a rule taker, but being a rule maker, because the EU is a federal structure and there's qualified majority voting. And whilst it's possible at certain treaty states to get opt-outs for certain things, and Britain did that, notably, casting one's mind back, John Major did that, Tony Blair did that. But generally speaking, one has to accept the directives, one has to accept the legislation, and a very, very high amount of British legislation during the period Britain was a member was in effect EU legislation. So it was about authority, it was about autonomy. It was about sovereignty. Has it worked? Yes, it's a short answer. Yes, for those goals. Britain is now a sovereign country. We left the EU just over a year ago. We left the customs union on New Year's Eve last year. So in a political sense, we're not only a sovereign country that makes our own laws, determines our own borders and money, but we are no longer in the customs union and the single market. So we are free to make trade deals around the world. Now, there is a little cautionary point that needs to be said, to be even-handed and in the interests of balance, which is we are not very long out of the European Union, customs union and a single market. And this is an unusual situation. We are in a global pandemic, aren't we? We are all faced with this dreadful pestilence, which is coronavirus. And probably our economy here in the UK like many, is experiencing a downturn, perhaps even a technical recession. We're not quite sure. Wait to see what the Q1 figures and the data is in a few months. But so you could argue we don't fully know to what extent that the UK economy has taken an economic hit for leaving the EU. I think I, for one, in the questions that when I was asked at Cal Chamber in April 2019, I said that I thought it would be bumpy economically. And actually, for many people, for many Brexiteers, for some, it is about kind of the open seas, free trade agreements, and they would believe very much that we can be more prosperous. For lots of people, it wasn't really about economics. It wasn't about pounds, shillings, and pence, as we say. It was about sovereignty. It was about not being a rule taker. It was about determining one's own borders, not paying money into a club, and having as much good government and partnership with our cousins across the channel as we can, do stuff together collectively, but not being a federal polity. So that's not really, so I think on balance, yes, it has been a success, but economically, we have to wait and see because we don't honestly know yet.
Well, great. Thank you. That's a great introduction. I think you have a presentation for us and a slideshow where I think, as with anything, I mean, I think for the people who live there, what were they after and have they achieved that is great. But for many of the people that are on the watching today, it's what's it going to mean to me? What's it going to mean to my business and my relationships and with the UK? So maybe I'll turn it back over to you for your presentation, and those are the collateral things that are a little different than what exactly the proponents were after. So great, thank you.
Thank you, Alan. So yeah, so this presentation is California, UK after Brexit, prospects for partnership. Next slide, please, Nikki. So yeah, as I said, it's important just to make sure we have it clear in our mind. The UK left the European Union on 31st of January last year, and the Act of Parliament that facilitated that was the European Union Withdrawal Agreement 2020. And that actually brought to an end the reasonably long membership that Britain had in this political and economic club, which began, I guess, as the European communities, and then emerged into what we would know as the European Union, which has a single currency, although Britain was never in that. It has a central bank, it has a constitution, it has a flag, it has a national anthem, it has a president, it has a foreign minister, it's proposing an army, and yeah, so it kind of, as the Americans say, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck and goes quack, it probably is a duck. Well, to be honest, the European project evolved into something that began, I think, very sensibly but modestly as a trading cooperation, economic trading club of Western and North European nations. And it has evolved through the will of the key leaders in Europe into being a political union, a very close political, economic, social union, which to many people looks like a very large state. So Britain left after 43 years, and then it entered a period immediately after leaving. It entered a period of transition, and that was almost like a negotiating period whereby the EU and the UK would have a series of talks and then determine the terms by which they would have a future relationship, the terms by which they would do business with each other. And it went right to the wire, as most people would imagine, because negotiations always do. And pretty much at the 11th hour, finally, a deal was done. And yes, so the UK EU trade and cooperation agreement was signed on New Year's Eve last year, a day before what would have been a reality of a hard Brexit. Britain leaving, going on to the WTO terms, would have been regarded as a third country to the EU and having no deal, having no arrangements whatsoever. So that would not have been great for business, arguably. Some would say it would, others would say not in the short and medium term. There's lots of disruption, uncertainty. Now, of course, Remainers would say, and some business leaders are saying now, well, this current system's still not good because there are still impediments to trade and uncertainty. But in between those two things, leaving and the end of the transition and getting that deal signed, we all have been affected by this dreadful pestilence, which is coronavirus. And so that has, that certainly took a lot of the government's focus and Europe's focus. They were trying to fight that and simultaneously do the biggest deal pretty much in modern history for Britain. And then on the 1st of January 2021, the UK officially left the EU customs union and single market. So yes, we are operating as a economically independent country, and we're going forward. So yeah, next slide, please, Nikki. So Global Britain, that's the big kind of slogan that the Conservative government is pushing. Its post-Brexit vision for Britain, very much in the mind and the mouth of the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and the Secretary of State for Trade, which is Elizabeth Truss, Liz Truss. So to what extent have we seen in this very short period of time, a year since leaving the EU, but really only a month or so leaving the customs union, to what extent can you say there's any kind of building blocks for global Britain, any kind of signs of global Britain? And that's kind of an aspirational term. It means a post-EU outward-looking, Britain. Well, okay, I think there's strong claims for it, but we can't be too complacent about it. I mean, I think the strong claim for it is that Her Majesty's Government's Department of International Trade has signed 63 trade agreements to date. Now that's pretty good. That's pretty within the year. That's pretty good. That's a year of being outside the EU, but that's a year of also pretty much having COVID, and most of these deals and meetings have been virtual. They've not been physical. I mean, some of them have, but most of them haven't been. So, I think the civil servants have done a fantastic job. 59 are what we could call live. 4 and have not yet gone live. They're expected to by the end of Q1, quarter one this year. The other thing I think is very notable is that Britain has formally applied to be part of the 3rd largest trading bloc in the world, having left the EU, which is the first, wanting to join the 3rd, which is only purely a trading bloc. It's not a political or social union, unlike the European Union. And that is the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, famous for obviously not having China in, famous for the United States kind of withdrawing its interest from under President Trump. But this is something that the UK government's very keen on getting involved in. Really great access to markets, and so yeah, for the UK, if the UK is admitted, but I think it will be admitted, very much I do, that will be quite a win, I would suggest. But I don't think it's the full story, and I don't think we can say that the government can be complacent, and I don't think you can, because an awful lot we have to be even-handed here. A lot of these trade deals are with very small countries, where the terms of trade might be reasonable for the UK, but it's a very, very, very small proportion of trade, very small proportion of trade. So in a way, you could argue it flatters to deceive, 63. Now, I'm not going to be too harsh, because I think there's some very good government work's been done under some very difficult situations, with pandemic and everything. But nonetheless, there are free trade agreements that need to be struck, most notably with the United States, and then with India. And then, of course, a third, and that brings me a much more problematic situation, problematic in terms of human rights, problematic in terms of issues of, patents and, all sorts of issues, intellectual property and all sorts of cyber issues, and that's with the People's Republic of China. So given everything that's happening in Hong Kong with the Hong Kongers and all the abuse of human rights, given all the, the dreadful authoritarian measures that China has had towards its Uyghur Muslim population in the West, there are real issues that are in the minds of policymakers about China, but also one has to be a partner with China as well, given their size and their influence and everything. So global Britain, I would say optimistically, they've had a reasonable year, and I think if membership of the CPTPP goes ahead, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I would think that's a win. But there are 3 big deals I think need to be done, or certainly 2, and we'd have to think about the last one. But I think we're a ways off yet. Thanks, Nikki. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's look at the UK-US trade partnership. Well, the data from the US Chamber of Commerce states just a few things that I think that friends here listening, ought to dwell upon. That the UK and the US are each other's single largest foreign direct investor. So if you only think about countries, you don't think about blocks, you just think about countries, sovereign countries, the UK invests more as a country in terms of large direct investment in the US than any other individual country, and vice versa. The US is clearly the UK's biggest investor. So I think that tells you everything, maybe not everything, but an awful lot. The trust, the history, the willingness to work together, to some extent, the similar levels, both being advanced, industrialized, capitalist countries with very diverse sectors. The other thing I want to say is that the US is the largest export market for the UK. So so a free trade agreement really matters with the US, really matters for Her Majesty's government, really matters for the UK. But also, I would say to that is the US has a good good service surplus with the UK of 19 odd billion quid in 2018. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good for the United States. The whole trading with the UK is favorable. And so where are we at? Well, we have the UK and US have already signed a mutual recognition agreement. And as we all know, that's a precursor. It's a necessary precursor to a trade agreement. And it basically means that we respect each other's standards of checks and products and safety and things like this. So, we have faith in each other's efficacy and each other's, the processes that each country has in terms of product development and trading behavior. So I think that's really important to start with. And there was 5 rounds of talks up until and under the Trump administration, and I think it's fair to say that the new change of administration in Washington, D.C. has affected the pace of negotiation. Transitions do, moving from one administration to another. There's different ways of doing stuff, different perspectives, different interests from one's own party, and so things have slowed down a bit. There are sticking points that remain, and we are probably all quite aware of those. Healthcare, agriculture, and the food sector. They are sticking points because I guess from a US perspective, US companies quite rightly would like the opening market access, which is really hard what a free trade agreement is, in those areas of healthcare and agriculture and food. Now, because of the largely public nature of UK healthcare, publicly funded through taxation, largely, not exclusively, but largely publicly provided, and the emotional kind of space it occupies, be you on the right or the left in British politics, I think that's a sticky wicket in terms of healthcare and agriculture and food. Perhaps there's more wiggle room there, but I'm optimistic for a UK-US trade deal to be agreed. I'd like to think by the end of this year, but there are sticking points. Next slide, please, Nikki. So how about UK-California trade partnership? Well, I think it's important to flag up a few things. There's a very strong track record between the UK and California for cooperation. Cooperation at the universities level, cooperations in terms of technology, cooperations in terms of visits and tourism, cooperation, I think, in terms of wanting to go out there and invest in each other's sectors. I mean, UK-California trade is very much two-way and meaningfully two-way, in the sense that what the UK sells to California is very similar to what California sells to the UK. When we look at key sectors, they're very similar sectors. And also the other really encouraging thing is trade is broadly balanced. Neither one party has a very notable surplus. So trade's pretty balanced. It's broadly equal. It's in very similar sectors. And I think what underpins this is that the Californian economy, like the UK economy, is highly developed. It's very high in skills, generally speaking, and is quite diverse. And there is shared values. There are very shared values, which you probably have less of between the UK and certain regions of the US. Perhaps, whilst there are overlaps, it's less immediately obvious. But I think with the West Coast, there's quite a similar outlook between citizens and many businesses. I'd also say that I think businesses in California, when I talk to my friends in California, when I talk to my friends in the Bay Area and at Berkeley, and I've done a few things with them, and I'm speaking to friends tonight as well, business, leaders in the finance community tonight, later on. I think businesses have faced similar difficulties in California and UK because of shelter in place or lockdown, as we say it. So by the nature of the advanced and highly technical and very skilled economy, I think there's a shared story that we can talk about in terms of the challenges we faced during shelter in place and lockdown. And I think people are just pretty desperate to get up and running and to really meaningfully sort of build back better, to use that phrase that President Biden and the Biden administration are very keen on. And it's the same sort of thing that the Johnson government in the UK are talking about. So we want to leverage our long-term relationships with close partners where we have shared values and similar areas, similar two-way trade, so we can really start to get back post-COVID. So I think the UK-California trade partnership is really crucial. And I think, in a way, that which has been done in the past is a very firm foundation to look to the future. And I would like to think that as negotiators hopefully come together in the coming months between US government and the UK government, the knowledge we have between the Californian and the British trading communities can serve as an exemplar of how Anglo-American trade can go forward. Thanks very much. Next slide, please, Nikki. So I want to, before I just hand back to Alan and take questions, because we've had lots of questions submitted, and and that's great. But I just want to just round off, say one or two things. I think going forward also, I think there's a couple of things. There is a real strength and a concern. One strength and one positive thing and one concern. I think one strength moving forward is that at the American federal government level with the new Biden administration, I think there's a sense of optimism from the United Kingdom government that we can almost get back to a bit more politics as usual in terms of multilateral traditional approach through institutions, and I think that the Biden administration will bring that. So I think that's very positive. I think the bit there's a bit more concern from the British government is that the Biden, well, certainly President Biden, as when he was campaigning, and some of the Biden team seem slightly less enthusiastic about the United Kingdom, less enthusiastic about the UK being out of the EU, which was also something I guess perhaps from that President Obama said. Whereas under the Trump administration, there was a degree, even though things were quite sort of chaotic and everything, there was a degree of overt messaging that the UK and the US were close partners. So I think in one sense it's positive, this new administration, in terms of British and American trade, and hopefully a free trade agreement. But the other thing I would like to say, and I would be remiss if I didn't say, is that the mood music does matter. And I think people are hoping that there can be the American president will bring to mind how effective transatlantic trade has been. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt, Dr. Beach. Next time, if I had thought about this, we would have sent you a bottle of California wine, because it's wine drinking time where you are in the UK. So next time we do this in the afternoon for California, we're going to make sure you're well taken care of. So, in terms of the financial markets, I think these are one of the questions for a business person. What am I going to notice that's different? What am I going to have to do? What hoops am I going to have to go through? And maybe you can touch a little bit on, London was the financial capital of the world on that side of the ocean and in the continent. Is that going to continue? We know everybody wants a little piece of that, and they want those jobs. How do you see that happening? And I think as part of this, when you can touch on any of these questions, I assume things will be different a year from now than they are today. There'll be an evolutionary process. And what do you see in your crystal ball there? So we'll just start off maybe with that question.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think you're quite right, Alan. I think things will be different. I think we are now in the United Kingdom in lockdown 3. We're now in the lockdown 3, and so the Prime Minister said we're pretty much not going to come out of this until earliest till June. So this is having an impact on business. It's having an impact on trade, and everything, and on commerce as well, of course. So you're right. Things are not. This is not the normal. We don't know what normal looks like. We're not sure when normal will begin. In terms of the financial markets, well, they have been, and the investment houses, they've been preparing for this for well over a year. They've been preparing for this for several years, even since June 2016, when the referendum result came out. There've been teams basically prepping this. I mean, talking about what might happen, war gaming it out. I still think the UK can still be the global financial centre. I think the UK, the City of London, has as its competitive advantage, a very high skill base, very attractive packages for people to work in London. London's an incredibly desirable city to work in, and so I don't think that goes away overnight. I don't think that goes away. I think the nature of those houses and those brokerage firms and those banks and those insurance firms together in the square mile in the City of London, and all of the concomitant benefits of living in London, I don't think they go away overnight. And then there'll be visas for people who can want to come and work from elsewhere, who have a job, and I think that's pretty straightforward. These are high skilled jobs, so I don't think London becomes any less attractive for Britain leaving the EU. And I think actually the financial houses have actually had a head start over business, really, because it's much harder getting goods to market if there are non-tariff barriers. Whereas if most of your trade and services is digital, it's over the screen. There are fewer. There's no physical barriers. It's not like getting your goods to port and finding at the port, there are new systems in place, and it adds extra time and longer time for your drivers or your hauliers to carry your goods from place to place. So I think that the markets are naturally very reactive and very flexible, and so I'm quite positive about the City of London.
One of the things I think that you have, certainly the UK has a history of, is your higher education system, which has been a magnet for throughout Europe and throughout the world to attract people. Do you see that continuing? And is there going to be any barriers to the rest of the EU being able to take advantage of it? And at the same time, I think what it does, it helps you attract the talent from the continent.
I think there will be barriers there. Yes, I think that's right. So from the next academic year, so in America, you start school like in August. We start school in September. But from the next academic year, 21-22, EU students wanting to come to the UK for higher education will be viewed as international students. At the moment, they're viewed as home students, as UK students in terms of fee structures. That will change. There'll be international students, and so the fees will considerably go up. And the other thing is, at the moment, they're actually eligible through Student Finance England to get finance from the British government. That will also change. And they won't be. So I think what I'll see the push more to scholarships, and more bursaries. I can foresee companies sponsoring, especially at the postgraduate level, programs, and trying to attract the best and the brightest from Europe and around the world. But in terms of those EU students, it will change. It will become more expensive, and that might well be a disincentive for them to choose to come to the UK. You are right. I think after the US, I think the UK is probably the nation in terms of higher education and everything like that. So I don't think it'll have an impact for international students who are from countries outside the EU, because they always had to pay the international fee rate and they weren't eligible for financial support from the British state through Student Finance England. But for the EU, I think it probably will reduce the amount of students coming.
Well, you very well could be more selective if you're going to enhance the cost, mitigate the cost through scholarships. Then it's not everybody that will come in. So there were, obviously, relationships, and as I asked, will we notice anything different when we visit, when we take a nonstop flight to London again? But there was some. You started off with a little bit of civics, and I think people were interested. How does this impact me? How am I going to impact my business? But there are some interesting things that I think may or may not affect us economically, but are certainly part of the civics lessons of the UK and the relationships between Britain and Scotland, so to speak, and Ireland, and do you see these things as being long-term problems, or differences, or do we see this as one of those things where over time, whether they be fishing rights or sovereignty or however they work out, are going to evolve to where it is a United Kingdom in all respects?
Yeah, interesting point. There is tremendous tension, I think, between the Scottish National Party, who are in effect the the administration in the Scottish Parliament. They're in effect the Scottish government. Um, that's they self-style themselves as the Scottish government, as the Scottish administration. They're going to win again, all the polls suggest, in May. They've been in power since 2007. They want a second referendum on independence, what they call IndyRef 2, Independence Referendum 2. The first one was in 2014. That was meant to settle it for a generation. Both sides who signed the Edinburgh Agreement agreed that. But they say, the SNP administration in Scotland say, Brexit changed that. 60 odd percent, 62% of Scots wanted to stay in the EU. That's true, they did. I think it is one of the real big internal tensions in British politics. The Conservative government's not going to give them a referendum. I think that's probably right, actually, because the last one was only in 2014. But the polling right now does show a majority of Scots want to leave, and I think that's mainly because as time's gone on since 2014, you have younger folk who only know devolution, younger folk who only know a SNP government think this is, Scotland, it'll make no difference at all to Scotland being a country of 5 million people, being completely independent, having to set up a brand new currency, and hopefully trying to get back into the EU. And so that pretty much determines the polling figures. The older folk are much more pro-union. So, but I'm afraid, speaking as a unionist, I'm quite happy to put my cards on the table here. I don't want to see the breakup of the countries that both my grandfathers fought a war for. But yes, it is a clear threat. And if Scotland does go independent, yes, there is still a United Kingdom, but a United Kingdom that is different and not as we know it. So you asked about, visitors. You can still come to the United Kingdom on the, without a visa and stay for 6 months. American citizens can still do that. It's a bit more generous than the US visa waiver program, where say I can come to California for 90 days, but it's the same principle. But you can't work on that visa. If you want to work, then you have to apply for actual visa status. But you don't need a visa to come to the UK now. It's no change for the US citizen. You can just come 6 months, travel, leisure, see friends. Academics can come for conferences. You can have a business conference. You don't need visa. It's just a normal 6-month thing that American citizens and friends used to be able to do. So
I find it sort of ironic that the Scottish are upset that the UK exercised its sovereignty, and now they want to do the same thing. But it's a little ironic there. Yes.
Yeah, yes, you could say that. Although I guess what I would say is, it's that the Scottish people send elect MPs the UK Parliament, and it's a
Yeah.
UK Parliament decision, isn't it? And yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of as you know, as we uh, uh, take some final questions here, and talk about this. What are the challenges ahead for the future? And you've talked, referenced it more than a few times because it's an overriding factor is the pandemic.
Mm.
Do people look back and say, we did better than the rest of the continent in preparing for the pandemic and getting the vaccines and getting people vaccinated? We have made, in hindsight, the right decision. How do people look at it that way? Do people?
I think some people, I think Brexiteers instinctively will say, well, it's been vindicated in terms of the they're having the foresight to order early, get a rollout strategy, and just the evidence of how many people have had vaccinations. So I think they would say that. I think some of the Remainers would say not. I also think we have to be cautious when we give credit to the Conservative government about this. They did make a number of blunders. I mean, no way near enough PPE equipment was ordered. And when it was ordered, much of it was defective. Some of it was defective. Blunders of ordering, contracts that didn't deliver, not enough of it. There was a blunder also about, not having enough focus on the care homes. That's the elderly folks' homes, which, where the virus went through. I've got my grandmother's 99 years old. She's in a care home. She's 5 miles up the road. Thank the Lord that she's been okay. But, there was a blunder there. And I think the other one I'm more sympathetic to, this was a judgment call. Some countries, you think of Australia, New Zealand, they shut their airports, they closed their borders. Now, Britain being instinctively a very open country, very kind of economically liberal country, open as in liberal as in open to trade and capitalism, and also with such proximity to Europe, and having lots of internationals working in London and everything, the government didn't want to do that. But looking back in hindsight, that was a judgment call. They should have done that. So I think this is the way I say it, Alan. I think the government and the Prime Minister had a very poor first half, and they've had a much stronger second half. So I don't think there's no space for gloating, because many, over 100,000 people have lost their lives. But I think the actual rollout, the way the country's come together, not just through doctors, nurses, but huge amount of some of my students have been trained, and they're now qualified vaccinators, and they're there ready to give up their time and to go and and do the public spirited thing and to offer vaccines. So I think we can't be complacent, and we can't be have any kind of kind of hubris about this. But that said, in the midst of a dreadful pestilence, you have seen the best of British in the neighborliness and the public spiritedness of people.
So as we look forward, what are the challenges? So what is the unfinished business?
Yeah.
What is the challenges ahead that need to be resolved, so that 3 years from now, which is probably a Pollyannish to say, can anybody declare a win-win between the continent and the UK? So what's ahead for us? What's ahead for you and in the fellow countrymen there? The challenges ahead. What should we be looking for, and as we move forward?
Free trade deals. We need to do a free trade deal with United States, obviously India, and there's the thorny issue of China. That they need to be done. No two ways about that. Secondly, there are non-tariff barriers at ports of entry, certain ports of entry on the European continent. There's stickiness there. And it's, whilst it was really good, the deal that the government got is a tariff-free, quota-free, free trade deal with Europe, which is very positive. There is a stickiness with the non-tariff barriers, and that will take businesses a while to get used to, factoring in time, doing paperwork, maybe some of the digital stuff beforehand. So that will take time, but between now and when it's sorted, it will cost, because time is money. So that is something. I think as I've alluded to, there is this ongoing question about Scotland. So on my more pessimistic days, I think that perhaps it's too late, that it's now inevitable. although it would be very difficult if Scotland did leave, because they've got a land border with England and vast majority of their trade is with England. So I think the terms of leaving the UK, let alone the issues of currency, are going to be very challenging. And I think the fourth thing is a challenge going forward, Alan, seeing as you've asked me, is the issue of Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland, very much is in the UK customs territory. So there isn't a hard border, but there are checks done at certain points. It issues a port of origin. So there isn't a border, because we can't have a border that invalidates the Northern Ireland Agreement, the Good Friday, or sometimes called the Belfast Agreement. And the principle of consent is at the heart of that agreement. Consent that there must be no change in the constitutional terms of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom without the explicit consent of Northern Irish representatives. So we just need to make sure that those difficulties about that are actually in the Northern Irish Protocol, which is a document with it, part of the UK EU withdrawal agreement, get resolved. It's a thorny issue. There's pressure from Northern Ireland and Northern Irish leaders about that. We need to be very aware of that. But it was a difficult position, because obviously, the UK is outside the EU, the Republic of Ireland's in the EU. So there's a border between part of the UK, Northern Ireland, and an EU country, the Republic of Ireland. But there is no physical border, and they can't have any physical border. And we want a seamless movement across that border for people and for goods and for everything else, services, because we want that open, tolerant, post-Belfast Agreement spirit that there has been. We can't have any impediment there. We can't have anything that suggests that we're kind of dividing again and we're going back to the troubles. So that's probably the biggest thing. And then, of course, as I've said about the free trade is important. We need to do more of these free trade agreements, and then sorting out some of these non-tariff barriers, and the issue of Scotland. But I think overall, Alan, if I was to say, overall, I think Brexit has been a success in the short term, although I don't think we can confidently say anything, because we're in the middle of a pandemic and there are these issues we've got to do. But, in a year being out of the EU and like a month or so being out of the customs union, quite a lot of trade deals have been signed. And in the middle of a pandemic, the United Kingdom has vaccinated millions upon millions of its most vulnerable people. That can't be said. The same can't be said for great European nations such as Germany and France and Italy. So make of that what you will.
Well, that's very informative. I mean, I think so much so. I'm going to ask this question. We're coming to a close here where people will lose their attention. But you have 40 years of law by the EU, and I think that which has obviously led to some of the support for Brexit. Do you see an exercise by the Conservative government to go through and say, we're going to audit the EU laws that apply to us and pick and choose, and some we're going to adopt and some we're not?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's a sensible parliamentary approach. I mean, the thing that Parliament does, you could say Parliament doesn't really do legislation as well as it does scrutiny. It does scrutiny extraordinarily well. Sometimes there's stupid laws proposed, but the scrutiny is good. The public bill committees are very good, and so I think that's exactly what will happen. And that has been said. It's exactly, Alan, what will happen. We will have to go through and we'll say, look, a lot of this stuff we've co-authored. We weren't just a silent partner. We might have been an awkward partner, to quote the academic Stephen George from time to time. But that which Labour and Conservative governments signed up to, they were pretty good citizens. United Kingdom governments have not signed up to EU law when we were a member and then ignored it. There is a key EU member, a very close nation to the United Kingdom in terms of proximity, that pretty much has an approach where it signs up to pretty much everything, but has a kind of, how can one say, laissez-faire approach to implementation and compliance. I won't say any more. You'll probably figure out who I'm talking about. But the issue is, yes, the government will probably have that approach. And I think it's not just this government, Alan, but going forward, that I think there have already been areas outlined that they might want to revisit. But it's not a wholesale abolition or burning the house down, because a lot of it was co-authored by the UK. A lot of it's very sensible. It's fine. You think of food standards, you think of labeling, you think of packaging, other things. Actually, the UK has higher standards than the EU. Labour law, for example, is a higher standard in the UK anyway. You know, the UK is more generous in terms of certain leave you get and certain holidays and things like that. So yes, a line by line, parliamentary, methodical approach, what works for us, what perhaps doesn't. And I'm sure that will inform some of the future parliamentary battles that will happen in the forthcoming years.
Well, great. You know, we look forward to having you back in person. You can, and Suzanne took good notes, and she's going to grade you on all your predictions when you return. So thank you so much, Matt, Dr. Matt Beach, an expert certainly on the UK and its relationships with California and the United States. So this was a great presentation, and I appreciate it. And on behalf of all our members who were here watching, and thanks so much. And we look forward to seeing you in person.
Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much to Suzanne, and thank you to Nikki and all the team for helping. I would be absolutely delighted to come and speak again in the future in Sacramento in person. I'm hoping to get back over to Berkeley to give one of my, I give 2 lectures a year at Berkeley as a senior fellow. I'm heading over there in September if all goes well. So, but I'd love to partner with you again. And I just want to just a little message, wish all your members, have a good day, stay safe. And really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Doctor. Thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate it.